Hello and welcome to Turning Point Tactics, the competitive Kill Team 40k podcast, focused on giving you the strategies and tactics to seize initiative every turning point. I'm your host Ryan, and I'm joined by the Boxing Day hangover that followed the Christmas lunch, Connor. How are you doing this evening, Connor?
Well, as you well know, Ryan, I've been nothing but drunk during the Christmas festivities and basically went full werewolf. But when I eventually came round, I found out there was huge Kill Team news. We've got new balance data slate, new missions, new TAC ops, a new FAQ. Where do we even begin with this?
Just before we go into that, what is going for werewolf?
You wake up in a field with a ripped shirt and blood that you don't really know how it got there and can't remember what happened the night before.
Okay, all right, sounds good. We're just going to gloss over whatever that happened to you during the Christmas period, but we did get an opportunity to play quite a lot of Kill Team. I think we played 3 games as a family. I played 1 against Dad, 2 against you. I've had an opportunity to play quite a bit of the new. I say quite a bit, only like 8 or 9 games, I think, of the new map, the new missions, which is pretty cool. So, where to begin? Great question. So much to unpack. The data slate changed pretty much everything in the top tier of the game, which is awesome. Very much needed in some cases. I think there's still some teams that need a little bit more help. The new missions, again, changed just so much in the competitive scene, which is pretty awesome for us to be able to unpack. And then combining all of that, we've also got new TAC ops, which is primarily how you're going to score at least a third of your points, but it's probably weighted a lot more in most of the tournaments. So, and if that wasn't enough, they even went out and threw an FAQ out there to then address a bunch of inconsistencies, buff Star Striders a little bit more. I mean, make sure Star Striders were understood by everyone, and change some medic rules as well. So there is a whole bunch to unpack. I think what we probably should do is try and rate the kill team. So obviously we're on episode 4 now. We're going through that match play mission sequence, and we're at the select kill team step. Now, clearly, there's 2 parts to that, right? There's the selection that happens before you even get to the table, where you're going to choose which kill team that you want to bring. But there's also the little bit of the selection when you're at the table as to what models you're going to select. So I think it's probably good if we talk around some of the metrics that we're using to assess these kill teams, and then if we can do that, then when we give a tier list, people might be able to see where we're thinking stuff lies based on the metrics that we're using to assess, because it's so easy to be really subjective and just give very hot takes when you see a rule and go, oh my god, that's absolutely busted, and then it's only when you read it twice that you realise maybe it's not quite as busted as you thought, or vice versa. When you actually play it and see it on the table, you realise something that you thought wasn't that strong is significantly stronger. Does that sound good to you? Should we probably start with that, or do you want to go into anything else?
No, let's do it. Let's jump in.
Okay, there's different ways to begin of categorising like how good your kill team is at doing stuff. But when you look at the core bits, it's going to be how offensively capable are you? So how good are you at removing models from the table? Which is really important to deny your opponent's VP. And then the next bit is going to be how durable or survivable or defensive are you as a team to be able to then hang around and score your own VP. And then finally, I think that the sort of the third tenet is going to be how good you are at scoring missions. So or getting your own points. So that could be, let's say, a good example, Companion Scions can get free mission actions. That's a really useful tool for them to be able to play on like loot and salvage, or on the new mission, loot, which will obviously be a third of what you're probably playing in the future, which is pretty big. And they can be getting 4 points a turn without really spending any actions, what feels like to them, to achieve that sort of VP. So those are the 3 things that I think we should be looking at. And I'm going to go into a bit more detail into the metrics we use. But overarching, how offensive are you, how survivable are you, and how good are you at playing the mission, is I think what we'll begin with. So if you were to choose those 3, Connor, which one do you want to talk about first? Offense, defense, or mission play?
You know me, I love going all in. Let's discuss offense.
I don't really know why I even bother asking, because clearly if you're going to wake up in a field covered in blood, you only get that through an offensive lifestyle. So
blood for the God.
Blood for the Blood God, skulls for the Skull Throne. Is that the phrase?
Correct.
Yeah, whatever it is. Corn. All right, so first thing that I think we need to look at when you're looking at your offensive capability is the weapons that your kill team bring in and what damage breakpoints they have. So this is something that I think at the higher end of competitive play everyone acknowledges, or maybe you know is a thing but you haven't necessarily put two and two together, or you're doing it but not realizing you're doing it potentially. It depends upon where you are inside the various skill levels. But each weapon has a set damage point, right? So that could be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever it is. But the main ones are 2, 3, 4, and 5. There's a few 6 damage weapons, but it's pretty out there. And what that means is if you take your opponent's wound characteristic, you can then find out how many dice you need to resolve based on your damage characteristic to kill that model. So let's take if we talk about a guardsman equivalent model, a GEQ, that's 7 wounds, 5 up save. Now, if you've got a 2 damage weapon, you're going to need to resolve 4 hits with that 2 damage weapon, potentially a crit as well. That will reduce it, but 4 regular hits is going to take that guardsman down. So you get 4 dice through. If it's a 3 damage weapon, you only need to get 3 dice through, and if it's a 4 damage weapon, you only need to get 2 dice through. But no, that doesn't really improve until you get up to 7 damage, where you can then potentially one hit them. So that's an interesting thing to look at. So for me, quite often when I look at kill teams, access to 4 damage weaponry is really, really strong, because it's going to mean that you can kill those lower level models in 2 hits. And when you look at then the middle ground of sort of like your I think people call them elites in the past, or the mid-range, or the standard team, whatever we look at, with the 8 wounds and the 4+ save, again, 4 damage is going to kill them in 2, which is so much more reliable than, say, 3 damage having to try and get that 3rd hit through. So that's the first thing that you need to look at, is that damage breakpoint, and how many weapons do you have with that. Obviously, you're used to playing with Pathfinders, which is an entire team, right? Well, just 4 damage weapons.
Yeah, 4-5 pulse gun. Well, the burst cannon's 3-4, but predominantly it's a 4-5. What when you mentioned there with damage breakpoints, there's another angle that I was just thinking while you're talking about it. I don't know if it actually blends with the defensive side, but take that 8 wound model. If you're putting out 4 damage, it takes 2 shots to kill, and if you're putting out 5 damage, it takes 2 shots to kill. The difference is that 5 damage is going to injure someone. How do you factor that into your damage or your offensive capability?
That's a great point. And it's also, again, when you talk about 4 damage versus a 7 wound model injures, it doesn't necessarily versus an 8. But you're absolutely right. And there is, when we talk about survivability, something we need to talk about is how you can overcome that potentially ability to be injured, or work around it in some way. But my initial assessment for damage is going to be, as you say, that damage breakpoint, and then the ability for crits to injure, or the ability for regular damage to injure, is again really, really important. But the other thing with that, and this is where I think a lot of people miss out, and we had the tactical tip last week of, dice don't kill people, dice with rerolls do, but how reliable is that damage? So if you're hitting on 4s with no rerolls, but you do 4 damage, that's great, but you're probably not killing anything anyway, because you're only going to get 2 hits through. They're going to retain 1 for being in cover or whatever, and you're only doing 4 damage, and they might even make another save and block your other one. So how reliable is that being delivered? Now, interestingly, when you then look at your offensive capability, the next thing that's tied intrinsically to that is their opponent's armor save, right? Because let's say you're playing against Custodes and you have a bunch of 4-5 damage weapons but no AP, the chances of them making a 2-up save is really, really high. So even if you have quite reliable weapons, you might get the volume of attacks to start pushing things through, but you're probably still going to see them making 3 saves a turn. So the next thing is AP. So does the team have it? And if they do have it, at what range is it being used is something to consider as well. So if all of your AP weapons are very, very short range, that's great. You've got AP, but actually, when you look at how a board is being operated, it's really limited in its application, because you might not have the right model in exactly the right place for them to be able to use that AP efficiently to be able to finish that kill. So I think that's another thing to look at is, damage breakpoints, reliability of that damage, and then do you have access to AP in the right way? Because If you don't, it can really hurt when you're trying to put down some of the bigger models with good saves to get that damage through. Now, there's something we'll talk about in a future episode about like maths, is just, again, lots of volume of attacks can just burn through that, but you also need to be able to deny it if it's a good save.
I agree 100%. I wanted to add a third layer to that, if you will. The idea of I agree with everything you said so far about AP, but underneath that, lethal and to some extent rending as well, because putting a 6 now turns that 2+ save into a 6+ save. So it's not quite as good as AP, but it's definitely adding something to the lethality.
And not just that, but you've already talked about the fact that some of the crits, like a 5 damage crit or a 4 damage crit, might be enough to put a model to injured. And lethal is 100% going to do that, and it's going to get through invulnerable saves. So that is, again, a really good way around it. So another way of looking at it is, AP's great, lethal's even better in a way of potentially forcing through those saves, because even like against Custodes, unless they're rolling a 6, it now takes 2 of their dice to block a crit, and that's, again, significantly reducing the damage that's going through. And the next bit that I'd say in your offensive capability is going to be your blast weapons. So some teams don't really have, so in the meta, you've got the horde teams, you've got the elite teams. Elite teams, you sort of want focused damage in one place, and in the horde teams, you want the ability to spread that damage efficiently across multiple models. Long range blast is one of the best mental taxes I think you can apply to an opponent, right? And we just played a game. I was using my Illicit and Star Striders versus your Pathfinders and your crew as well. And it's just that having the angles constantly you're thinking about makes it so much easier to make a mistake that someone can capitalise on, because it's not a frag grenade at 6 inches, which is a really easy threat range to plan and mitigate against. It's that constant presence across the board, all those angles you have to be really thinking about. So access to blast is another key tool to be able to force either a constant mental tax on your opponent if they're really, really good, or against not super brain opponents, they're likely to make a mistake which you can exploit and maybe pick up a double kill or 2. So I think that's another really good metric for offensive capability. I think that's kind of how I'm looking at the offensive side of it. Do you want to go into defense now, survivability, or do you want to go into mission actions? What do you think?
Makes sense to talk about defense, I think.
Cool. Right, let's do it. So, there is so many ways I think your team can be survivable and tanky. Now, I reckon if you ask a new player, how is a team survivable and tanky, they're going to say they've got a good armor save, and they've got lots of wounds, right? And that's probably the go-to answers. But I would actually argue that those are your last resort when it comes to survivability. They're good, don't get me wrong, but that is your last resort. So lots of wounds can be dealt with by high damage weapons, and a high armor save can be dealt with by AP. And if you combine all those together with reliable high AP shooting, then you're going to delete those models pretty quickly. Which is why I think when we roll back the clock at previous data slates and we look at like Custodes, maybe they weren't too broken. So because a team like Scions have access to that high damage, high AP and reliable shots. So other things to look at: your invulnerable save, if you're on those models, is important. But again, potentially could be quite swingy. Most invulnerable saves are 4 up, 5 up. There's a few 3 ups that are out there, but generically looking at 4 up and 5 ups, which can be quite swingy unless you've got access to cover, double retains or retain critical hits. That's really, really good. Or if you have some sort of rerolls in your defense dice, they're a bit rarer than your attack dice, but if you have that, that would be a good way of doing it. Or some sort of damage reduction ability. So there's a few that are out there at the moment. You've got -1 to your normal damage, -1 to your crit damage, -1 to both. You've got half damage on 1 dice. You've got all these different ways of doing it. And that's all great at being or giving you tools to avoid taking damage and being survivable. But what's the problem with that is, if your opponent rolls out and fires a plasma gun at your Custodes and they just roll 4 6s, it doesn't really matter that he's got a storm shield. He's probably going to die. Like unless you roll really well and you make all your saves and you get some crit saves, whatever, but it's probably not going to do that. He's probably going to die. And as a result, you're like, oh, this is not worked out well for me. I've just lost the model because I couldn't necessarily roll the right saves. So I think there's other ways I like to look at survivability, which is a model advantage. So do you have a significantly increased number of models? Because each one of those requires a shooting attack, unless you can get a blast or whatever to get rid of. So if you've got a lot of models, you are very durable. And another one is, can you conduct one-way shooting? So this might be called asymmetric shooting, non-reciprocal shooting, I shoot, you no shoot, whatever you want to call it. Many different names. What it means is I'm rolling dice to attack you, but you don't get to roll dice to attack back. And the ways that you can get that is either through having models with silent, or models that have got movement, the ability to ignore obscurity, get the angles that you need, whatever it is. And also, probably most key, is activation advantage. And we'll talk about the ability to have last and first turn. So I get the last activation of turning point 1, but I also potentially get the first activation of turning point 2. That can be a really good way to make sure that I've dealt damage to you, and then I'm going to then deal more damage to you at the start of the next turn, and there's not much you can do about it. At which point they've already sort of done their main stuff, which Pathfinders has in droves. There's other teams that have got it as well, which I think when we get into the tier list, it will become apparent why I'm rating those teams based on those two things. Any thoughts on any of that, Conor?
No, I think it's a really great insight, actually. Like, yeah, you think of the tanky, beefy models that are out there, but actually everyone's tried shooting at that vet guard sniper that's on conceal in a high bit of terrain, and it's just impossible. You have to like run up with a grenade, and there you go. He's only 7 wounds, he's got a 5+ save, but he's probably way more tanky than the Custode.
Yeah, he's already retained 1, so you've got to get at least 3 hits through on your crack grenade. Otherwise, he survives, and there's always a chance he makes the other save on a 5-up or a 4-up, depending on whether he's used a strap ploy, and suddenly, wow, you've thrown a crack grenade. You've had to get your guy into the position to do that, and you've not got rid of that model, and the guy that you've sent on that mission is almost certainly going to die, which can be pretty rough, right? Can be pretty rough. So finally, I think we're going to talk about mission play and their ability to do that. So for me, when I talk about the mission, I mean, it's good now probably to have a look at how we're looking at new missions, because new missions are 6 objectives. 2 of them require actions to do. 1 of them requires being alive on the point at the end of the turn. And 2 of them are now going to stick with you until someone then goes and counteracts. So, I think for me, the ability to do 3 mission actions is really good, because let's say you need to get into the mid-board to tap an objective. That's not regularly within a normal move away. Normally it's going to be a move and a dash. So unless you're a 3 APL model, you're not going to be able to get that straight away. The other way of looking at it is having just 3 APL, but fine. And that's going to get you onto the primary to be able to do those things. So a team like Starstriders, they have a model that has 3 APL, they have a model that can do 3 mission actions, and that means that they can get to that mid-board and get on those objectives, turning point 1, when a lot of other teams can't. But there are teams that can. Hunter Clay can forward deploy someone. That's another way to look at it. It's things like forward deploy are ways to be able to get a similar level of mission play that other people can't do. But the other 2 main points to look at is what archetype is your team and what tac ops they have access to. So each archetype now, because you can't take all your faction tac ops, forces you somewhat into a play style. And they're all quite different, and they're all, I think, quite interesting. And they're now much more balanced than they used to be. But there are still some like auto-include tac ops, I think, that are going to get you some guaranteed VP where you need it, such as recon, recover item. You can get that and have no difficulty in achieving it. So recon for me is a very strong tac op or archetype, because it often requires you to do something that your opponent can't deny, so long as you're choosing the correct ones, or if you do it smart. Security requires actions from your opponent to come forwards, and you can deny that as well, but it's a 2-way thing. They know where you're trying to work, and you know how to deny it. So that's interesting as well. But you can hold back and still score. So we'll do a whole episode on Tac Ops, and we'll do our assessment of each individual one and which one we think is good. But they're crucial to your ability to score points win you the game, and that's a really important thing now, because you can't have all 3 faction Tac Ops. Speaking of faction Tac Ops, you can take one and you get to choose which one it is now. So if you've got one that gives you guaranteed VP, I'm thinking something like the Kazakhin's faction Tac Op, to just designate a priority objective, move on to that, score a guaranteed 1. You're probably going to get that again. It'd be very hard not to max it as long as you play your team right. That's a really good way of being able to play the mission and guarantee you some points. I think those are the main metrics that I'm looking at. Do you think there's anything we've missed at all?
No, I think we've covered it. It's a good way to assess each team. Do you want to talk about how that then applies to a tier board?
I think so. So, I guess it's probably worthwhile explaining initially just how we've made the tiers, right? So, I think everyone's probably seen the classic gamer S through to D tier, where it goes S being the very, very strongest, best of the best, probably too strong. A being, one level down from that. B being one level down from that. C being one level down from that, and D being one of the worst tiers. And then usually they throw in an F tier, which is like pay your respects. That tier's not even worth talking about. I think it's worthwhile for us to just kill teamify it a little bit. So I think the game is generically quite balanced at the moment, but there are some teams that are maybe underperforming and some teams that are slightly overperforming, and it's just good to identify where those are. So in our kill team list, or our kill team tier list, we've got D being the bottom teams. These are teams that we think desperately probably need a buff. Like they have some deficiencies in their tool set that means that they are not able to compete at the high levels for whatever reason. And it's different for each team, but there you go. C tier is your standard tier, right? So that is going to be they've kind of got everything. They're not exceptional. They'll do well for you. If you're a good player, you can win tournaments with them because they have what they need, but they're not, for me, reliable enough is kind of what I'm viewing it as. B tier is above average. They've got everything that the C tier has, but they've got those extra abilities. They're either more durable, they're more killy, or they're better at playing the objective. Whatever it is, they have that method to get around those 3 core principles in maybe 1 or 2 areas. So in 1 or 2, they're doing that better than everyone else. And then finally, A tier is going to be, they've got all 3 of those bits that I think you need as a team. You know, they can play the mission well, they're durable, and they're killy, and they're reliable in doing those 3 things. S tier, for me, is the teams are too strong and they need to be toned down, like, urgently. There's, for whatever reason, they're maybe not fun to play against, they're breaking a core mechanic of the game, something, but in those 3 things, they're either doing all of them exceptionally and too well, or they can very easily deny other teams from doing those 3 things. That's how I rate S tiers. They're teams that need nerfs going forwards. So I think probably best if we just start at the bottom with what I think is the worst team, and then we'll move up. And I should probably again caveat, I'm not ranking compendium teams in this. I don't think the game is being balanced around compendium teams, and I think it's unfair to try and spend a lot of time talking about compendium when they're never designed to be balanced around the game. Do you think that's fair, Connor?
Absolutely. Yeah, let's focus on the real teams at the minute.
Alright, so just had a massive balanced data slate, and some of the main teams that received buffs were Hierotech Circle and Phobos. There were some other buffs as well, but let's start with the team that I think is potentially the worst team in the game, and I'm going to go with, I think it's Hierotech Circle. So they've just been buffed, and it's great, they received some nice, I guess, quality of life changes. Their leader is now slightly scary. might be able to actually kill something, whereas before they were just completely unreliable in what they would or wouldn't kill. And they've also been helped by the fact that they've been given more CP by the new missions, and the fact that the ploy that they're going to use every single turn to reanimate someone is also being reduced in cost to zero CP. So you're probably thinking, well, Ryan, surely they're really durable because they keep coming back and they can be revived every turn. And you just said that the leader's now kind of killy, and you're right. Like those two things are true, and they do have some 4/5 damage weaponry, so you think they'd be pretty good. However, there is a fundamental flaw in the team, is that they are too slow. So you can play around the mission against them very, very easily, and they're always going to be on the back foot. So they're going to have to force themselves out into the open because they're too slow to be able to capitalise early in the game. They're going to be forcing themselves out into places where they don't want to be, and it's very easy to punish them because of that. And they just don't have enough reliable shooting to push through damage. So for me, I don't think they play the mission well enough. I don't think they're offensively where they need to be just yet, and I think they're fundamentally too slow to play the mission. And that's going to hurt them when they're trying to stretch out to 6 objectives with only, I think it's 8 or 9 models. Like trying to spread out and take all that ground and do those missions is just going to hurt them a lot. Any thoughts on that, Conor? I know you haven't played against them much, but
no, but I agree with what you've said actually.
Okay, next team, the other team that received a buff is Phobos. So I think they're the next on the D tier, next level up. So the reason why they're better than Hyrotech is they can play recovery quite well, so they can score okay. But when it comes to survivability and when it comes to offensive capability, they're not reliable at all. So survivability, they're only 12 wounds, and we talk about damage breakpoints and how many damage you need to force through with 4 damage to be able to kill a Phobos Marine, and it's only 3. And you talk about the fact that they have a 3+ armor save, really no rerolls. They're reliant on the cover and on the board being good, and they can flip their order back to conceal, and they can use obscurity potentially to their advantage. But if they're doing those things, they're not being offensively out there killing stuff, or they're not playing the mission. They have to choose which one they're doing. And there's only 6 models, so as soon as you start choosing, that's when they really struggle. And if you play someone like Phobos into Legionary, you just feel how unkilly the team is. You cannot punish mistakes with their 3/4 weapon damage. 3/4 weapon damage. They have a mine, but it's telegraphed. You get to tell them that you're coming, and that relies on like a cooperative opponent putting 2 models within the blast range of each other, so you can hit both at once, which a good player will never give you that. And even then, you have to suicide your own model to be able to potentially get a double kill, where you're more likely to kill yourself than you are to kill them. So they're a team, sadly, they're not very offensive and they're not very defensive, but they play the mission better, so they're going to score at least somewhat reliably, and that might be able to pit them over Hyrotech Circle, which just can't get around them. So I think that's probably where they belong at the moment. I think what they need is rerolls. Hyrotech Circle need more movement shenanigans, and all Phobos need is rerolls. If you look at Intercession, they get balance basically on all the weapons if you set the right doctrine. They've even got ceaseless guns, whatever else. Phobos needs some way to make their shooting more reliable, and I would love to see some access to like a 4/5 weapon that's similar to what Intercession get with the special bolts. Something like that, just to give them the punch they need to actually kill elite teams, rather than what they've got at the moment, which is a P1 ploy, which is cool, it's a bit of AP, but it's not addressing the main problem that you're going to roll 2, a 1 and a 2, and your opponent's going to make 2 saves, and he's going to make one of them into a crit save anyway because he's Nurgle, and you're going to do 0 damage. Like that's all they're doing. And even if you do get a 3rd hit, it's probably going to be a 2. So it's 2 damage going through, and it's just not enough to kill people. Cool. Let's move on. Unless you have anything on Phobos you want to add, Conor.
No, it's just funny how even though they're ballistic skill 3, they're still very swingy with their dice without those rerolls. You can't get that reliability.
Yeah, and it's something that I think people often overestimate. It's like, oh, they're ballistic skill 3, they're definitely gonna do some work here, but no, sadly not. So talking about ballistic skill 3 leads us in nicely on a segue to Kazakin, who are not ballistic skill 3 but ballistic skill 4, which I understand why they've done this. They brought in the elite points mechanic, fine. They obviously feel that it's too strong tying that with ballistic skill 3 because you're not auto delete but have a high chance of killing elite teams very, very easily, and that might lead to feel bads or whatever. However, what you've ended up with is a really fragile team with only 7 wounds and a 4-up save, they're gonna fold like paper, and there's not really any way to make them more durable or survivable. And their guns, at the best of times, are swingy, but you're even against even on just raw averages, you're expecting to get 2 hits against a Space Marine, forcing 1 through with your elite points. That's 3 hits. They're going to make a save either with cover or with their own just 3-up save, and you're going to do some damage, and you're going to lose your plasma gunner. And you rinse and repeat that 6 times. There is 6 intercessors that are still left alive, and when they shoot you back, they're just going to fold you like paper with their bolt guns, and they're probably going to pick up 6 to slash all of your team on the return fire, and that's just going to be rough. So I think that's probably where they need to look at that team. They don't have the offensive reliability that I want. It's okay, but it's just not good. And they don't have the defensive reliability either. They don't have much of an activation advantage against any of the Horde teams. They don't have an armor save advantage, a conceal advantage, or anything like that against any of the other teams. And they're just not survivable enough. But they do play the objective well because they can get quite a good tack-up deck from what they have access to. So I think they're going to score okay, which probably means that you're going to see them winning, up to 50% of games. But I don't think we'll ever see them get above that. And I don't think we'll see many of them on a tournament run, because as soon as they get to the high-level tables, I just feel you're going to be punished so much for their fragility. Any thoughts on that, Conor?
I again agree with what you're saying. I'm trying to think how you fix them. They're an interesting side. This elite point ideas. It's an idea. We haven't seen anything like that before. It's like dice manipulation in that way, but it's limited to 1 dice, and it almost makes it pointless. I'm wondering if they can do dice manipulation to multiple dice and go, right, they're not a defensive side, they're an offensive side. That's their niche, and they do those elite points. But then is that broken if they can then do that?
Yeah, so I think there's 1 or 2 ways of doing it. You either make them unbelievably offensive, so they can kill stuff really, really well, and maybe offense to their best version of defense. So they are going out to table you by the end of turn 2, and maybe only have 3 to 4 models left themselves, but that's going to be enough. I think the way you do that is probably making them ballistic skill 3. Another thing that they could do is remove the gunner restrictions. It seems somewhat needless I think at the moment they can only take the sniper in 3. They could probably do with the extra gunner, because if they're going to be offensive and they're a team with special weapons, well, let them bring the special weapons rather than just have las guns. That's probably my take on that side of it. If you wanted to be creative though, then maybe you just remodel the way in which the team's being run. So maybe make those decoy grenades that they've got and the stun grenades that they've got not cost action points to use, or have a strat ploy that lets them use it for free and reduce the EP of them, so they then get this ability to breach and clear, and they're throwing stun grenades, and they're an APL manipulation team, and they're a shutting off Overwatch kind of team and guard, and that's the way that they do it. Maybe that's a way that they could solve it in a creative way. Or again, maybe you just give them a strat ploy just to give 1 free elite point per optive shooting attack, and then another strat ploy or something that lets you use elite points on as many dice as you like. I don't know. Few options there, but at the moment they're not reliably killy. They're not at all durable, but they play the mission well. So one of those bits needs to be changed. I know people are saying make them 8 wounds. I think it will help, but I don't think it's going to solve the problem altogether, if I'm honest. So I think we'll go into C tier and our standard tiers, right? So we are now, I think, looking at teams that said that they can do kind of everything, but maybe they have some sort of reliability issues in one of the 3 areas, and that's what's going to let them down. So I'm actually going to begin with Corsairs. I really like Corsairs. I think they're loads of fun to play. There's probably a bunch of people out there that are saying, oh my god, why are you rating Corsairs so poorly? They've got a 50% win rate. They're good, right? They've got access to AP, they've got lethal weapons, they've got good melee, blah blah blah, all this sort of stuff. And they do, you're right, they have all of that, they've got it all. But they are an entire team that are just down to dice. So their ability to remove a model from like heavy cover or light cover and make them appear as if they're on engage order, that's a brilliant ability, right? But it's down to a dice roll, and more often than not, it's also range limited to be reliable. So there's every chance that you play right and that dice roll just fails you. They don't have any inbuilt rerolls, so they can get one where it's like if you get a crit, you can retain a miss, all that sort of stuff. But you're then looking at rolling a 6 to be able to proxy it or proc it to then get that benefit. They've only got 4 attacks in melee, and they get like, so all these sorts of things, they just stack one after the other, and it means that they're not particularly reliable. And I think that's why you're seeing them do okay, because they have all the tools, and with a good player they're doing all right most of the time, but they're just gonna end up not having the reliability to move forwards. And that's kind of where I see the team. They've got a little bit of everything. They're really fast, they're really good, but they're just not quite there with the reliability that you need in a tournament to go 4 games in and get everything that you need. Just think of time, we'll keep pushing through. Commandos. Again, they got most of the things that you want, right? They've got blast weapons, they've got some access to AP attached to those grenades, or to the dynamite specifically. They have the rocket launcher, which can be quite mean. They've got some good melee, but again, they're not particularly killy. They are surprisingly durable with their 10 wounds, and they auto retain 1 save from Skull Out, and just a scratch as well also helps them maintain that durability. But that's kind of like, they're okay, but their save's only a 5 up. So they're not terrible, but not bad. And then their ability to play the objective can be kind of good, so they can forward cooperatives to be in the right place at the right time, to be able to tap those objectives, and they can use their ploys to move around the map and set up some threats that you probably weren't seeing. So I think they've got all the right tools to take you to the right place, but maybe not quite as reliably as you'd want in shooting or melee. And that's because they've only got 4 attacks. They can quite easily get parried out against a good melee opponent if they're not doing enough damage. So that's kind of where they sit. Moving on then, in C tier or standard tier, we've got Warp Coven. I think again they've got everything in that package that you need. So they have an ability to deny people getting modifications on APL. They've got the ability to do some AP shooting with their Soul Reaper cannon, all that sort of stuff, and they can move people around. And they actually have quite a lot of access to rerolls if you're selecting the right targets. But they're quite complicated to use, and they've got a lot of, like, everything sort of has like a limitation attached to it. So the Rubric Marines are great, but they have to be within 6 inches of their leader to be APL 3, and they can only ever move 6 inches, and their damage mitigation only ever applies to low damage weapons. So it's that kind of thing of like, they're good, they've got some stuff, but they don't quite have everything that you want, and that's why they sort of sit in C tier. They can do it, but it's not reliably enough, or it has caveats being applied to it, whereas some of the other teams get all these abilities just without caveats. Moving on again, C tier Blooded. They're getting a good rep at the moment because they are effectively quite a durable team with between 12 and 14 bodies, depending on how you want to play them. But they can have as many bodies as Vet Guard, and everyone knows that 14 bodies just instinctively is strong. They've got a lot of activations, and they've got a lot of ways of dice manipulation when it comes to offense. So either through their blooded tokens, which can be really nice with that auto retain, or an auto retain crit if they're in the gaze of the gods. But in melee, they can also get access to quite a lot of relentless. So their medic can jab one guy during deployment before you set up and give them relentless. That works really well on, say, like the enforcer with the power fist, because 4 attacks on 4s is useless, but 4 attacks on 4s with relentless is actually pretty effective, particularly when it's got brutal tied to it, and particularly when it's then also maybe -1 attack with their equipment they can do as well. And then at the start of the next turn, turn point 1, you can jab someone else and give them relentless. Start at turning point 2, you can jab someone else and give them relentless. So you can give their melee some reliability, but their shooting potentially lacks it. That being said, obviously you have the auto retains, but again, you're then balancing this auto retain system out. And if your opponent's killing the right models, you're losing those tokens that you need to guarantee your reliability, which can be kind of rough. Finally, in C tier, a team that has everything, I think, is Novitiates. I think they're really the strongest of the C tier because they are the most reliable out of all of them, and they do have a lot of tricks to increase their durability. But against advanced players, you can start to understand what those tricks are and play against them quite well. So Blinding Aura is a brilliant way of throwing someone off, their game plan. You spend some faith points, you don't get to shoot that model. But if you set up 2 valid shots, it's like, okay, well, I won't shoot him or her, sorry, I'll shoot this other model, and it doesn't really matter too much. So you can use that, and there's only so many times they can use that Blinding Aura before they're burning through all their faith points, and then you can start really punishing. So, that being said, they can be exceptionally killy because they've got, AP weapons, they've got so many rerolls and dice manipulation, they can guarantee reliability, but they are still only a 7 wound team with, 4 up saves or 3 up saves, depending on who you're shooting, and they only have 10 bodies. So it can go wrong quite quickly for them if you start getting those kills, and they don't have that many activations to be able to pre-position perfectly against higher model teams. So at the high level play, I think novitiates are starting to hurt with only having 10 bodies and being able to do all of it at once, because their limited resource of faith is being used to guarantee the reliability in offense and also defense. And if you're not really careful in your budget management of it, then you can run out of faith quite quickly. That's the end of C tier. You got any thoughts on that, Conor, on anything in C tier?
No, let's jump into B.
So this is the above average tier. They got everything, but they do some things slightly better than other teams. I'm going to start with Wormblade. This is a team that I think has been really helped out by the match play mission sequence. So now they can use the fortify step to set up a barricade in a good position, and even using climbing ropes, they can dash one of their heavy gunners into that barricade position and be able to lock down certain areas of the map just by using that fortify step. And because every single one of their operatives on turn 1 can use that flip order whenever they want, whenever they need, that means it really helps them. They've got a lot of great ploys as well that you want to use every turning point to maximise this team, and getting that extra CP is really going to help. So I think they've got good offensive capability when you look at the rerolls. Sadly, you do have to be quite on your ball with it, because it's only ever when they're flipping, usually from conceal to engage. But they've got methods of getting relentless or a better ceaseless during that as well. And they have, some quite killy models that can play around with durability. So Sanctus Sniper on silent, ignoring obscurity, being able to take those shots is really good. But likewise, they're going to struggle to deny people the same trick. So actually getting up the board and killing people at the other end of the board is quite difficult for them. They can set up these blast charges and all that sort of stuff, but actually reliably killing those models at range can be tough for them. But that being said, they can play the objective well, because they can pretty much get guys on 4 objectives on almost all the missions guaranteed turn 1, which is really nice. Infiltrate, I think is one of probably the weakest of the TAC ops, or the hardest to score anyway. So they're probably more looking at seek and destroy to be able to get those kills, and then it's trying to balance the reliability of achieving the kills with keeping enough models on conceal to do the activation advantage and that sort of thing. Next team that we have in B tier is Kroot. Conor, do you want to go with your thoughts on Kroot?
Yeah, well, I think we've been saying it since the Gala Dart drop that Kroot are absolute monsters. So I agree, but no, it's obviously since the release of this new data slate to come out, they are now. It's nice to see them actually playable, if I'm honest, because we had a couple of games the other day. They've got a few Blister Skill 3 going on, some GA2. The extra operative is nice because it allows them to start tapping more objectives. The cover, they've got the rogue rule, which means that they can retain an extra dice if they're in cover, which now can't be mitigated by no cover, so that makes them even stronger. Their equipment for meat went down, so you can give them meat, and they can, when they've been wounded but not killed, they can then take their meat for free and get back up to above half health and basically shrug it off and don't care. They're looking like a good side now, I think. So I think putting them in B above average is good. What do you think?
Well, what I'm hearing there from what you've explained is they have a lot of tricks to be durable, and it's hard for people to now shut those tricks off. With the new match play mission rules with the fortify, their sniper can get onto that silent cover and start causing havoc. They also have another silent weapon with the bow that can do some damage with lethal 5 as well. But they're also really mobile, right? Because you spotted something with Bound that I hadn't really realised until you...
We need to get it FAQ'd, I think, but the wording is each. So each time they do transfers, each time they climb, each time they drop, they can ignore the first 2, which basically gives them fly, almost.
Which is huge. So you can climb an Octarius building, and it's only going to cost you, because it would cost you 4 to climb it normally. It's now only costing you 2. So you're going to climb it for 2. You're going to drop that would cost you 2 normally, but now it's going to cost you 0. So you're going to basically go on a charge 6 inches directly over even an Octarius building or a Chalnath wall, whatever it is, as long as it's not more than 4 circle high, you can be flying over these things, and you're obviously ignoring any and all of these barricades as well. combine that with a base movement of 8 from a hound, and that's pretty terrifying. So they're really mobile, they're really durable with their 8 wounds as well. It's a nice damage breakpoint for a lot of weapons, and they can play recon quite well. The only thing that I think they're lacking is just reliable killing. So
the rerolls,
with the rerolls, yeah. So because it's tied to being, so they can get a lot of rerolls, but they can get balance, but it's tied to being heavy, which then again makes it easier for players to play around potentially. So I think that's where they're at for me. Is they are above average in durability and mission play, but they're not above average when it comes to offensive, which is why they're not up in the A tier for me just yet. I might be wrong on that though. I might be wrong on that, but that's kind of my gut feel as to where they are. Okay, next team along, we're into Void Dancer Troop. The menace that has been Void Dancer Troop for so long. They're still a problem, to be honest, because they are mobile, they've got inbuilt invulnerable saves. They also have, when it comes to durability in close combat, the ability to use Jest. So unless you've got crits, there's a chance that they're going to parry you out or force you not to do damage, which can be really mean against like 8 wound models when they have the 5 attacks and balance, because they're doing 4 or 5 damage themselves. So they can be killing you in 2 hits. So you can charge someone, and it sort of feels bad when you're on the offense, but then suddenly you get put into the defense by an ability. That's a durability buff that team has, and because they're 3 APL, they can play the objective really well. And normally you'd be concerned about throwing models out into the open or into light cover in front of your enemy to go capture an objective turn 1. But with Don No Field, another durability buff, they're able just to shut down that shooting from range, so you're then forced to get closer to them. But if they're playing on conceal, that's really hard. So a combination of being able to be concealed, ignoring the vantages that are a long way from, or like a long distance from them, and then just playing that light cover means that they can play the mission very, very effectively, and they're very, very hard to deal with both at range and in melee. And then when it comes to offensive capability, they're pretty good. They're not insane, but they have the opportunity to do quite a lot of double kills, which against low wound horde teams can be really, really oppressive, because they can charge a guy, kill them in melee, and shoot another guy. And with the spike damage from rending, it is swingy, but it can pick up double kills quite well. So that's kind of my take on them. I think they're above average. I think against some of the teams that are above them, you'll see that there's reasons why I think they can deal with them. But that's kind of where I think that they're sitting at the moment. The next team along then is recently nerfed, and these guys were probably in the S tier, I think, before this, and now they're going to sit in B tier, because Hunter Clade now have to make some really hard choices in the kill team selection step. So they're going to have to choose: do they want to have their 3 gunners for long range, or do they want to have the perfect balance of Sicarians and regular guys, but then only take 2 gunners, or 4 Sicarians and the regular guys, or are they going to go with 5 Sicarians but then lose their activation advantage and only have 2 gunners? So they're making some real hard choices here, where it's going to cost them either their durability or their offensive capability, whereas before this they had all of that in one. So they used to be far more offensive, far more durable, and far more, or have more bodies to play the mission than they do now. They also have into their equipment pick-up actions for free, mission actions for free, and methods of playing around with that, and a forward deploy. So again, they play the mission well. They've got access to recon, which is a really strong archetype. It's very hard for you to deny them those VP, and their faction tac ops are quite good as well. So all that combined, they're doing everything pretty well, but now they have to make some really hard choices in that kill team selection step, which I think is punishing them slightly, which means that they're no longer in a higher tier. Finally, in B tier, Gelapox. Again, another team that was, in my opinion, in the S tier prior to this balanced data slate. They had so much durability, and it wasn't just in shooting, because it like the ability to remove dice and have a feel no pain mechanic is huge, and that is one method of durability that they had. But they also had the ability to make everyone injured when they're in engagement range with them. So even if you got into melee, where they want to be anyway, the feel no pain still works there, and now you're hitting them on -1 weapon skill. Oh, it's just rough. But balanced data slates come in, it's reduced that range of the glitchling aura, so now they are actually quite vulnerable to shooting. So long as you mitigate threat ranges against them, and you sit just outside those threat ranges, you can probably get some shots at the big guys. If they want to move into the mid boards, sit on objectives, then you're probably going to see that you can get you can do the damage you need to do. And the other durability thing that they did have was obviously the glitchlings had super conceal, like gene stealers, So they kind of had it all, and they had a really good tack up as well. So they were playing the mission really well, and they were doing durability really, really well. Too well, actually, was the problem, which is why they're broken previously, or why they're nested previously, and now why they're less of a problem. And then they were actually fairly reliable when you started stacking things intelligently. Like if you're using the bugs to give you combat support, you can take your guy that hits on 4s to hitting on 2s, and suddenly that reliability is massively increased. Combine that with the blessings of infection or blessings of the pot, I forget which way around it is, but that means that they can then retain dice if they get too many misses, etc, etc. So suddenly they're always guaranteed to get a hit, and they can be quite explosive. So in melee they were killy, obviously they had very, very little shooting, but it was there and they sort of had everything needed. Now it's been dialed back slightly, so I think they're sitting at the top of B tier, above average, able to do everything slightly better than the teams beneath them. I think that rounds off the tier. Any thoughts on that, Conor?
No, let's jump into strong, A tier.
Let's get it in, right? A tier. So right at the bottom of A tier, I think it's Intercession. This is going to be your local club stomper, because they are durable, they're killy, they play the mission well, they do all three of those things quite effectively. They've got reliability in that based on the rerolls. They've got reliability based in their defense from either having durable or methodical, or they can use their attack ploy to upgrade a regular save to a crit save. They've got all of the bits in there to be able to keep their models hanging around just long enough. And just 14 wounds base is just, it's a lot of wounds to chunk through when you need to get going. So they're doing all of those things, and they're doing it well. They've got access to security and seek and destroy, which are credible attack op archetypes, which is good. They're doing everything, and they are I think the gatekeeper to all strong factions. If you're not dealing with them effectively, you're probably gonna struggle. And they also have the ability to flex quite hard from either being very, very shooty or being very, very melee, and play between that. And pairing them quite nicely, I think, is Legionaries. They're the next team that begins, I guess, our top 5 of factions, if people are tracking. Legionary, they do a very good job of everything that, well, we're talking about Nurgle Legionary here specifically, of doing the durability, the mission play, and the offensive capability, because they've got AP, they've got shooting, and they've got a lot of defensive buffs, which is going to keep them on the board for a long time. But they also have, which I really like about them, is just the ability to completely flex their team to something else. They're a huge toolbox, and you never really know what you're going to get when you go up into Legionary. It's different for every player. You might play someone who's really cautious, holds back, and exploits stuff, or maybe they're a really aggressive player and they're up in your face, and you have to be ready for any of those things. And they've got the tools for all of that, so they're difficult to deal with, and that's why they sit, I think, where they are. They can, I think, reliably have an advantage into intercessors with the amount of AP they can pack, which is really nice as well. So I think that's where they belong. Okay, we're into our final 4 teams. I don't know if this is going to be surprising for people, but I think at number 4 it's going to be Illustrated Starstriders, and that's because I think they've now got everything they need to be able to reliably play the objective with their Candid, the dog model that can go and fetch objectives and do that sort of stuff. They've got the free mission action, they've got the APL 3, they can move out on objectives, they can do all that sort of stuff. It's great. And they also have long range blast, long range AP in their orbital strikes, and now that it's boosted up to hitting on 3s, that's a really reliable long range blast. That's a really reliable AP2 weapon, particularly if you buff it with command points. And you think to yourself, well, thank God that team has now got extra command points to spend, because their ploys are fantastic, and they also have the ability to take extra command points as part of their team setup. So you can be going into turning point 1 on 5 CP, which is huge. But obviously there are only 10 models, and you think to yourself, these guys are going to fall apart as soon as they hit a stiff breeze, because just like Kazakin, they're only 10 models and 7 wounds. Well, no, because they've got the ploy Undaunted Explorers, where they're going to sit now on objectives and be minus half your damage from a single attack dice. Huge. And that just completely changes damage breakpoints. So you get hit by a Pathfinder with a 4 damage weapon, he gets 2 hits through, it thinks it's going to kill you. No, it just does 6 damage. They have a medic that can mean they can ignore it injured. They've got the, I guess, best medic for healing people with D3 plus 3 wounds. They can spend a CP and just regain 4 wounds on a key model. So they have all of these abilities. They're a massive toolbox, and they've got loads of flex, and that's why I think that they're up where they are. And people are worried about their ability to play into elites and that sort of stuff, and I do get it. But the other thing that I think people forget is in like Kazakin, they have one plasma gun, they have one melter gun. If you kill those models, they're gone. But with this team, like, any of their models can be that orbital blast, and that's a huge amount of mental load to put on the player going through. I think that's pretty much it where I stand with Elite Star Riders. Any thoughts on that, Connor?
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head with them, really. That durability is really tough, and particularly, like you talked about shooting, but the melee side of it as well, because you only get to hit the once, and you're going to halve the damage of that. They're now not dead. I can't think of a scenario where you can kill them in one if they're on full health.
Yeah,
it's a big shake-up.
Real rough, which is good. And to be fair, I do think the team need it. I think they're in a good place now, and I think we'll see a lot more success with Star Riders in the next few tournaments that are coming up. Okay, top 3. Oh my god, I never thought I was going to say the words, but Pathfinders are not top of the list. Pathfinders are in number 3. I think the nerf has had its effect. They're still obviously a really strong team. They're up there, number 3. There we go. But one less body really hurts them. They do have the ability to get rid of people in sniper nests at range with the marker lights, so that sort of ploy or strategy doesn't work against them very well. And they still have a huge toolbox available to them. But now, with less models, they're having to really think about, am I marker lighting people? Am I shooting people? Am I doing the mission actions? Because 2 of the 3 mission types are all action based. And that action economy really starts to hurt them. So before, where they had all of it, just because to the weight of numbers, they've lost a bit of that. Now, don't let me take away from the fact that they are incredibly killy when they need to be. Right, these guys are all 4/5 damage weapons, everyone across the board, or better, and they also have pretty much, very easy access to double rerolls, double balance on all their models. Makes them insanely reliable in their killy output. And the fact that there's 12 bodies makes them durable, and the fact that they can give a free dash for an entire turn on one of their turns makes them highly mobile. So suddenly you've got a mobile, very killy team that takes a lot of activations to get rid of, and that's where Pathfinders are. But they are, I think, struggling now in comparison to these other teams to play the missions as effectively as those teams do, which is good. That's fine. They were doing it all too well before, I think. You've obviously just been playing some Pathfinders. How did you feel pre-balanced data slate, post-balanced data slate? How do they make you feel?
Pre-data slate, I mean, yeah, they're a side that just stomps everyone. They're overpowered, overtuned, as you say. Now, I actually really like this nerf, predominantly because it makes me sit and think about the kill team for a second. Beforehand, I knew what the kill team was without even having to look at the other side. I go, okay, I'll take these guys. Now, I'm losing a man, so and all the guys are very good. So now I have to really think about who's going back in the box and who's coming out to play. And I like that. I like that cognitive element. And you're sat there staring at a puzzle. You just got to look at the pieces and figure it out. So I quite enjoyed that playing against you this Christmas. But, they're still a solid side. They're so killy. They've got so much offensive power still, even with the man down. You've touched on durability, the fact there's still 12 models. They've still got a medic. They've got 2 guys that can shoot from silent. The Transpectral can shoot from obscurity. I mean, they're still very durable. They're a solid team.
And I was just talking on Discord to some EU players who are top tier Pathfinder players. And I think the sentiment there is echoed. They still have all the tools they need, don't get me wrong. And they're still number 3 on our tier list. Don't get carried away. Don't think it's their days done. Treat them with respect. But they're definitely up there now with a bit more balance than what they used to be. And we're even talking about stuff like not using the group activation of the recon drone, but like saving it to your next activation just to give you the activations you need because they're hurting for it now, which is huge changes, which is good. All right, final 2 teams. They are both Imperium teams. I'm going to begin with, at the end of A tier, number 2 is Vetguard. They've got spotters to be able to deny heavy cover. They've got loads of bodies that they can get into the right positions. They do have some reliability in offense through various means. They've got some great area denial in that their remote mine, being able to get people out of heavy cover and hit a very large area as well. And they're able to play the mission so well. Security combined with the extra bodies, so 14 bodies, and being able to move onto objectives as your last activation. And you think to yourself, how are you going to get there? Well, they can get, if they want it, +1 move and a free dash at the very start of the game. So they're taking ground far better, they're moving up, they're getting what they need, and they're able to really play around some of these new changes and make the most of them. So I think the team has everything it needs. People have been, I think, sleeping on Vet Guard recently because a lot of competitive players have dropped them. People seem to think that they don't have what they need. I don't think it's true. I think that they're able to do everything that they need to do, but they're not quite the strongest team because of a few reasons. But I think that's where they're at. Any thoughts on Vet Guard, Connor?
Yeah, just like you said, the underrated side, because they came out the first team to come out, so they got the hype for them. Their Krieg, WoW, and then newer, cooler models have come out, but they're still solid. They still got all the stuff you want from a good team.
Yeah, and because for instance, stand fast, one of their objectives or attack ops is just go and basically sit on more objectives than your opponent. And having 14 bodies, you want to do that anyway, and to be able to throw your guys forward and do that is so strong to be able to score points, which is really, really good. Combine that with GA2 grenades and whatever else that you need with rerolls, it's a great place to be in. So the strongest team then, in my opinion, and it still sits in A tier, is Imperial Navy Breachers. So I think they are currently number 1, but I don't think they're broken. But the reason I think they're number 1 is because they do the durable horde really, really well. The damage reduction ploy is really good, and their reliability on their offensive action is huge through abilities to use things like close assault and blitz. So when it comes to being able to kill stuff reliably, they're good. When it comes to hanging around and not dying reliably, they're good. And when it comes to playing the mission, they have access to either seek and destroy and security, both good tac ops. I think they can do that pretty well as well. So I think there's commonly a lot of mistakes people play with this team is they maybe overestimate the reliability and they don't understand the durability of them comes from that damage reduction ploy, not from just running forwards and trying to use a 4-up save. That's not going to get you safe, or the stims aren't going to make a difference either. Like it's the -1 damage that's going to make a huge difference, but that slows your team down. So you've got to play smart with them, but if you're playing against a smart player, they can position well, and they're really hard to dig those guys out of wherever they're set up. So I think they've got all the tools to get rid of snipers on vantage points, which is really nice. They've got rid of, or if you're playing against elite team, that they can get rid of guys in heavy cover, which is really nice with the cat unit. They can play the objective really well with their 12 bodies and their ability to sit on objectives and not be removed easily. And they've got a lot of explosive high damage weapons through blitz, and they can flex very well into playing against either a horde team with their shotguns and their grenades and their relentless last volley, or playing into an elite team with the plasma gun, the melter, the demo charge, and that sort of stuff as well. So they've got a little bit of everything, and I think they're in a really good position going into this next season to be able to pick up quite a few tournament wins. So in sum, there is no teams that we currently think need nerfs. I hold ready to change my opinion on that when I see a bit more tournament data and see where people are placing with them. But the top 5 teams is going to be Breachers, Vet Guard, Pathfinders, Star Striders and Legionaries. And the bottom 5 teams is going to be Commandos, Corsairs, Kazakin, Phobos and Hierotech. And then the other teams are all in amongst it in the middle. And that's pretty much where we think we sit. Connor, what have I missed? Any points you want to add in?
No, I think you've covered that quite nicely. This has been a long episode, this one, but I think it had to be, and you've covered all the points and given your reason behind them in good detail. It'd be nice to know what the community thought and what we missed. There might be something that we overlooked here. Get in touch with us, let us know. Is there any way for people to see the board that you've made?
Yeah, so we'll put that into the video. Obviously, it'll be on our Patreon. I'll throw it up on the Instagram as well, and all other stuff. We have a link tree now, just at Turning Point Tactics, which has all of our links, and I'll try and share it as far and wide as we can. And as you say, Conor, it'd be great to hear people's opinions, because maybe we are missing something. Maybe someone has seen a strategy, a tactic that we haven't quite picked up on, and they think, actually, Hierotech Circle, everyone keeps saying that they need a buff, but if you play them in this way, you can get around whatever it is that they're deficient in, and you can really make that work for you potentially. That's the sort of engagement that we want, because at the moment we've tried to make it objective, but it's always subjective, right? I can only base it on what I've seen, what I've read, and what I know. So I can't forecast everything, and hopefully people will see that we're trying to be as objective as possible. But if they have a different opinion and they think, actually, I think, Ryan, you've missed this, let us know. That I'm always open to trying to grow new ideas and understand more things going forwards, because I think that's really important. I think we are way too long in this episode to go and do any more for tactical tips or audience questions, so we'll cut this one here because it's the longest episode by quite a while, and we'll make sure we catch up on those in the next episode where we're going to be talking about TAC ops and that sort of stuff. And we're also hoping to get another guest on to talk through some top competitive tips. So we'll go with that. Anything you want to add, Connor?
Nope.
Okay, well, to the audience out there, hopefully you found something new or useful while listening. If you did, throwing us a like will be greatly appreciated. If you want to make sure you don't miss any episodes, make sure you hit that subscribe so you get notifications as soon as the next one drops. And if you can't wait and you want early access, we always have a Patreon where you can get early access to all of our content ahead of time. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback, so drop us a comment below and we'll get right to you. Thank you so much for listening. I'm your host, Ryan. This has been Turning Point Tactics, and Conor and I will see you next week.
See you next week.